It's here at last, the first day of our countdown to Bond 25. And to kick off this countdown, folks at home, I'm going to ask you to join me in making like an anti-drug PSA of the 1980s, and let's all just say no. The first movie in the James Bond franchise, Dr. No. This came out in October of 1962, which means it's just a couple years shy of pushing 60 years old. This movie is almost ready for retirement. Two British agents on location in Jamaica are mysteriously murdered, so it's up to James Bond to head down to Jamaica himself and figure out just WTF is going on. It's a simple spy flick. There's really nothing more complicated to it than that. Interesting fact, this was not the first James Bond book. Ian Fleming's first James Bond novel was Casino Royale, and that was followed by Live and Let Die, and that was followed by Moonraker. No, we didn't get to Dr. No until the sixth book in the series. But when the producers were taking a crack at the very first Bond film, they peeked through the pages and decided that this would be the easiest, most simple book to adapt. Turned out they were right. Now, we're going to be going through a lot of firsts in this retrospective, and Dr. No is going to be chock full of them. It's going to have more firsts than anything because it is the first movie. So yes, it's our first glimpse at James Bond. It's our first glimpse at Moneypenny, played by Lois Maxwell. It's our first glimpse at M, played by Bernard Lee. It's also the first appearance of a longtime Bond ally, this guy, Felix Leiter, who in this movie is played by Jack Lord, with some really styling women's sunglasses that he is just rocking for the whole duration of this film. And Dr. No features the first on-screen mention of Spectre, the Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion, who are the arch nemeses of James Bond. They are the Cobra to his G.I. Joe, except their acronym is really unwieldy. In terms of gadgets, once again, Dr. No takes the route of simple as a pimple. There's nothing special or fancy in this film. The only gadget Bond receives from the MI6 quartermaster, who incidentally in this movie is called the MI7 quartermaster. Again, they were finding their footing. But the only gadget Bond receives is his trademark gun. And there's a story behind this. At the beginning of the film, Bond is carrying around a Beretta. That's his weapon of choice. Why is it his weapon of choice? Well, because when Ian Fleming was writing the Bond novels, he decided James Bond is going to have a Beretta. That's going to be his thing. But then something funny happened. This man poked his head into things. His name is Jeffrey Boothroyd. Jeffrey was an avid fan of guns. He was a gun nerd, and he also happened to be an avid fan of the James Bond novels. He read Casino Royale, he absolutely loved it, but there was one thing about Casino Royale that irked him. It irked him so much that he sent a letter to Ian Fleming that basically said, hey, love your book, but there's a teensy-weensy thing in it that doesn't really make sense to me. What was that teensy-weensy thing? Well, Jeffrey Boothroyd, being a gun fanatic, understood the kind of character James Bond was and understood the kind of gun a Beretta was. Boothroyd figured out that the kind of guy James Bond is, he wouldn't really go for a Beretta in his line of work. A Beretta fires a very small bullet at a very slow, relatively speaking, velocity. The type of impact wound a Beretta would make isn't exactly conducive to a super spy atmosphere. You can't really drop a fully grown human being with a Beretta. You can certainly hurt them, but there are better ways to do so. So Jeffrey Boothroyd introduced Ian Fleming to the Walther PPK. This is a German pistol that Boothroyd claimed would be much better suited to Bond's line of work. It has a very small barrel, like the Beretta, so it can easily be compacted into a shoulder holster, but despite that, the Walther PPK still manages to fire at a more powerful velocity. So, James Bond essentially gets to have his gun cake and eat it too. He's got a gun small enough to hide, but still packing enough punch to drop a human being with one shot. Because, as Jeffrey Boothroyd states, the first shot is the most important one. So yes, Jeffrey Boothroyd is essentially the first fanboy to get in a comment section and complain about something in a work of fiction that he loves. He was the proto YouTube commenter, except he commented right to the source, and Ian Fleming took that comment to heart and said, you know what? That sounds absolutely stupendous. And he changed the Beretta to the Walther PPK. As we see in the film, James Bond receives the Walther PPK from the quartermaster, and it has been his signature gun ever since. That's 60 years of James Bond canon altered by one superfan with a hella good mustache. Right now, there's like 500 Last Jedi haters who heard that story and are grinding their teeth into a pulp as we speak. Dr. No also gives us two of the most classic ladies in the Bond franchise, a franchise that is built on a foundation of classic ladies. First, we've got Sylvia Trench, who holds the distinction of being the first woman we ever see Bond romantically entangle with on screen, but she also holds a much more interesting distinction. Sylvia Trench is one of the only Bond women to appear in more than one movie. That's right, Sylvia Trench kind of was supposed to be this running gag where she is Bond's girlfriend in England, who he's always running off and cheating on when he goes on missions. So we see her again in the next film, From Russia with Love. And then that's it. We never see or hear from Sylvia Trench again. So the running gag was nice while it lasted. It was more of a jogging gag. It didn't get very far. But hey, Sylvia Trench is the first character who James Bond ever introduces himself to in his now infamous way. But then, of course, there's the lady we all remember, Honey Rider. Honey Rider is the first Bond lady and has pretty much stayed the prototypical Bond lady even after almost 60 years. Another fun fact, she's played by Swiss actress Ursula Andress, but there was a problem. After Ursula Andress recorded all of her lines, the folks cutting the movie together decided her Swiss accent is way too strong, we need to dub her over with somebody else. So every time you watch this movie, you are not hearing Ursula Andress' voice. You are hearing the voice of another actress named Nikki van der Zyl, who dubbed over both Ursula Andress and Eunice Gayson, who played Sylvia Trench. Both of these Bond ladies were voiced by the same actress. This dubbing thing is a pattern. You're going to see it a lot in these older movies. They cast a lot of foreign actors and actresses because they wanted that exotic feel. Bond travels a lot. He is a traveling man, and they wanted to give you that sense of worldliness. Unfortunately, they also were not fans of accents, which is a shame because I think it would have been beautiful to hear these actors and actresses speak in their native accents. But that's something we're never going to get, at least not in these films, so enjoy looking at Ursula Andress and listening to somebody else. Now it's time to meet our villain, the titular character himself, Dr. No. What's his plan? Well, Dr. No is a man scorned. He was kicked out of a bunch of science institutions and whatnot because people didn't really want to hear what he has to say. So now he's all pissy about it, and he decides he's going to use his radio beam to interfere with the Project Mercury space shuttle launch at Cape Canaveral. Yes, our first villain's big plan is just to make NASA look bad. Pretty weak. I find Dr. No one of the more fascinating James Bond villains, though, and the reason why is because he has this very interesting characteristic to him where he lost his hands. His hands were cut off by a Chinese mafia organization he used to work with. I think that's the origin anyway. So now he has a pair of prosthetic hands that are made of super hard metal. As a result of this, he's not very good at picking stuff up. You know, he can't wrap his fingers around a thing. He'd have a lot of trouble with this water bottle. He'd be like, okay, somebody get the cap off for me. But the plus side is he essentially has super strength because if he gets anything in the palm of his hand, he can crush it like a walnut. But the thing about Dr. No is this is a 2-hour movie, and by the time we finally meet him, there's only 20 minutes of the movie left. It's insane. We get so little of Dr. No. And it's a shame because I think there's a lot of fun that they could have had with this guy. But, silver lining, we may get that chance after all. You didn't hear this from me. Okay, fine, you heard it from me. But there's a rumor swirling around out there right now that the villain of the upcoming James Bond 25, No Time to Die, is going, in fact, to be Dr. No. Rami Malek is playing the villain, and his character's name is listed as Safin in all the IMDb and Wikipedia and whatnot. And we don't get much of Safin in these teaser trailers. He's just kind of there for a bit. He's wearing a mask and such. We get that there's some physical deformity going on, but that's par for the course for Bond villains. But the rumors are still swirling that he is going to end up being Dr. No, and we're going to get a Dr. No that frankly the character deserves. Here's why I think that might be right. In the trailer for No Time to Die, James Bond comments to Safin that bad things tend to happen to people who try to play God. Guess what? During the dinner scene towards the end of Dr. No, Sean Connery's James Bond makes the exact same comment to the villain. Sounds to me like they're trying to draw some parallels. Will we get to see Dr. No on the big screen again by the end of this countdown? We'll know the answer. I hope it's yes. Even the elaborate death traps in Dr. No were kept as simple as possible. The villains don't like that James Bond is sniffing around in their business, so what did they do? Did they tie him to something? Do they dunk him in something? Nope and no. They get a poisonous tarantula and set it loose in his bed. Yeah. Funny thing though, it almost works. Except the tarantula just kind of loses interest and doesn't bite him. But he looked afraid. That's probably one of the most afraid looks James Bond has ever made. At least until we get to Octopussy. Ooh, I can't wait till we get to Octopussy. What was my favorite quote from Dr. No? I gotta go with this one. James meets Honey Rider on the beach. Honey Rider's running around collecting seashells. She spots him, she gets all paranoid, and she asks, "What are you doing? Looking for shells?" And James replies, while ogling her in her white bikini, "No, I'm just looking." That's the champion here. So it's an old movie and it's a James Bond movie, which means it's time to figure out what was the most sexist and or racist thing about Dr. No. Well, the movie takes place primarily in Jamaica, and the native people of Jamaica, who are awesome in this film, they're such a wonderful group of characters, particularly Quarrel. Quarrel is one of my favorite James Bond allies of all time. He's great. But the people of Jamaica don't get treated very well by James Bond and the other white folks who come to this island. It's a little bit hard to watch, but that's still not the most racist and or sexist thing that happens in this film. No, that award has to go to this simple fact, folks. There are two prominent Asian characters in this film, both of whom are played by white actors in makeup. Yes, both Dr. No and one of his associates, Miss Taro, are supposed to be Asian, as you can clearly see from these pictures. These are white folks with some heavy-duty makeup around their eyes, and that's a shame for a whole bunch of reasons that, don't need to be spelled out at this point. There's a magic to Dr. No, though. It is a slow-paced movie, as a lot of the early Bonds were, but I like that about it. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of those old Hardy Boys books. I used to read those all the time as a kid. They were set in the, I want to say 40s or 50s. They were set really early on, and it was a lot of the same. It was just the Hardy Boys walking around, getting into trouble, seeing shady characters in fedoras, watching them from across the street, and then some other shady character gets into a black sedan and pulls away, and the Hardy Boys are like, "Ooh, get the license plate on that sedan, Frank." It's a lot of that kind of spy stuff. Walking around, being observant, not using computers and shit, just kind of using your eyes and the skills of your own two hands and getting the job done that way. Of all the Bond films that I would watch on TV with my dad, this is the one that I remember the most prominently. And it's the one that sort of sparked my imagination for James Bond, because there's a great scene in the middle of this where we're introduced to Dr. No without actually seeing him yet. The character Professor Dent, who is one of No's subordinates, is ushered into a very large room with a big skylight, and he's told to sit in a chair. And then you just hear Dr. No's booming voice permeate through the room like you hear a god speaking. And he's just like, "Sit down, go to the table, pick up the case." And to me, it was this awesome little party mix, because I had been watching a very grounded 1960s spy thriller that all of a sudden was turning into this quasi-comic booky science fiction thing, because this guy really was acting like an over-the-top supervillain. And when James gets to Dr. No's secret underground lair out on a mysterious island off the coast of Jamaica, it becomes even more supervillainy. I think that's the magic of this era of James Bond films, is they really toe that line between hard-boiled detective spy story and science fiction. And they do it almost seamlessly for the most part, but we'll get there when we get there. This is also the only movie where you will hear James Bond sing. Yeah, that's a thing. Sean Connery was cast in this because the producers saw him in this little flick called Darby O'Gill and the Little People. And in Darby O'Gill and the Little People, Sean Connery sings. So I guess they had this idea in their head that Sean Connery was this very whimsical musical guy. So there's an opportunity in this film for him to sing, and he takes that opportunity. Sadly, it's the first and last time Bond ever used his angelic voice in this way. So if you're one of those odd people who really just wants to see your super spies hit a chord in the right way, Dr. No is the movie for you. And in case you were wondering, he's singing about mango trees. But that's only one James Bond adventure, and we have 24 left to go on this countdown to Bond 25. Stick around, I'll see you here tomorrow. We are going to Russia without love, but we'll be coming back with a whole lot of it. See you then.